I'm joined by Aestus and SurfingBird, and we're talking Mythical Treasures. Imagine a weapon that not only grows in power the more you wield it, but it also brings your character on a personal journey of growth. I'm John Denore, and this is Goblin Points. Welcome to Goblin Points, Aestus and SurfingBird.
Hey John, lovely to be here.
Hello, John. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I am checking it off my bucket list. I finally got on a Goblin Points interview. I've been waiting for years to get an invite. So thank you. All I had to do was design something, and then you would want to talk to me about
it. We'll start with you, Aestus. Give us a short introduction of who you are and also how you ended up in the Draw Steel community.
Cool, yeah. So to everyone listening, my name is Aestus. I have a YouTube channel primarily called Aestus RPG. I used to be a pretty active interviewer of MCDM back in the early access days, which I remember very fondly. I have interviews with Jordy, with James, with Dale. So yeah, you guys can go check those out. But I've really been trying to transition from doing interviews to doing design. And so I've got I'll just say right now, if you go to my channel, what you'll see is I make periodical videos where I do in-depth analysis of each of the classes in the game. And if you watch those, I will update you on my current projects. And of course, we're going to talk about Mythic Treasures in this one. So yeah, that's me, Aestus. How I got into the MCDM community. This is true. Oh, I hear a lot of people say this, but I was a fan of Matt Colville back in 2016, and I know that I am because there was a video that he did that inspired me to make a D&D character, and I used the name of that D&D character and the year that I made it as one of my passwords for many of my accounts. So it's in my mind. You should
not be saying that. What are you doing?
No, I don't use it anymore. I don't use it. Don't even try. Don't even try, everybody. But yes, I got into Matt's videos because I majored in history in undergrad, and I was really interested in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and he used to do this really cool series that was called The History of D&D, One Fighter at a Time. I just always followed him, and when I heard he was making a tactical game, and by the way, at this time, my entire channel was dedicated to tactical computer RPGs, CRPGs. I just had to be a part of it. And I was watching from the sidelines, and when James started talking about the power roll, I was hooked, and I've been obsessed ever since.
And SurfingBird.
Yes.
A reintroduction, maybe, and also how you ended up here in the community.
Yeah, I'll make it shorter this time. I had a friend who I played a lot with online, and he introduced me to Draw Steel, and I really liked it as soon as I played it. And I've been in the community about a year, maybe a bit more, so relatively new. And yeah, I really like the game, so I started designing for it. In the past, I was really into making builds for 5e and stuff, and before that, when I was a teen, D&D 3.5, and it looks like that passion kind of translated into designing stuff for me for Draw Steel, because I think there's something about the fact that there's not that much alone fun or solo fun in just making builds for Draw Steel, at least for me. So that creativity gets challenged in creating stuff, which I found out is way more fun for me. So it's definitely a new passion for me to design stuff. So yeah, I designed the Scion class, which is this Gish Spellblade class, which we talked about last time. And then I discovered that I have an urge to design treasures for Draw Steel, which is how we got here.
Yes, and the reason why you're on this time, both of you, is because you're doing a product called Mythic Treasures, which features a lot of Mythic Treasures. So what's the pitch for Mythic Treasures?
Yeah, I hadn't practiced this, so this would be a good test to see if I can if I can improvise a pitch, Mythic Treasures are narrative-driven treasures, which means they have an attached narrative arc to them. So you don't unlock the abilities only by getting to a certain level. You also have to fulfill certain beats, as we call them, which was actually inspired by like a review I watched of a game called Slug Blaster on Quinn's Quest. Different story, but it was inspired by that. So they're narrative-driven treasures, but they're also more mechanically rich. So there are additional levels to them. So 3rd and 7th, you usually get heroic abilities as well. And additionally, because we gave them basically, you can only have one mythic treasure. You can't have any other level treasures equipped. We also gave them a lot more power budget to play around with. So they're more powerful, which allows us to make the designs more intricate and to basically enable more complex and interactive gameplay patterns and tactical loops within the treasures. So they're both narrative, but they're also more gameplay defining for the character that's wielding them. It really affects how you play your character, is the intent.
Yeah, you've been marketing it as that it's almost like your second subclass.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah. That was I feel like that was maybe a bit of an unlock in my mind, and I think for Aces as well. Once we started thinking about that, about Mythic Treasures as kind of like a second subclass, I think that gave us the leeway to do crazier shit, basically. Because once you look at it this way, you start thinking of like, okay, this isn't just a treasure, this is a whole fantasy that we're trying to evoke here, just like a class is, right? So we have this whole fantasy we're trying to evoke, not just a piecemeal thing. And how do we evoke this fantasy to the best of our ability? And that also gives us like I said, the permission sort of to make this very gameplay defining. And I think that's one of the coolest things about Mythic Treasures is like you can kind of think of them sort of like a second subclass, sort of like multi-classing, in that you can sort of mesh two fantasies together. So you have like the Censor fantasy, but then you have, let's say, Umbral Shroud, which is like the stealth item. So now you can sort of mesh those two together, and you kind of get the fantasy of like an Inquisitor, or maybe you have like a Conduit, and it's a conduit with one of the domains like of war, okay? And you give it like the Prismacore suit, which is like this Iron Man suit, and all of a sudden I think you can kind of envision it like, if you like 40k, kind of like a tech priest, or like the Omnissiah, right? So there's so many, I think, creative combinations that really help create new fantasies once you combine these two things.
Yeah, if I could add to that, the way I always like to talk about this is, I mean, this is kind of a first principles approach to treasures, and this is our own kind of attempt to build from first principles in the heroic fantasy genre. And we thought about literature. The examples I always give is like Thor from Marvel or Bilbo from The Hobbit. And if you imagine them in game terms, their treasures aren't just something that they found and discarded. Like Mjolnir for Thor is a big part of what he does, both in terms of combat, but also his narrative identity as a character. And so for me, the goal for Mythic Treasures was to make both mechanically and narratively defining treasures where you feel like it really is a part of your character. And when you pick these treasures, you are opting in to something both mechanically and narratively. And so the reason we restrict to just one is because we need the power budget, but also kind of the narrative room in these treasures that if you started mixing them, it would water down the concept, right? Because we wanted the package to be, I don't know how else to say it other than just identity defying. Like if you pick one of identity defining, rather, if you pick one of these, you're going to be different than your typical Fury and your typical Conduit. It really will make you different, the way you play it and the way you conceive of your character.
It's interesting because it feels almost a bit like the same, or the mechanical, or rather, the fantasy part almost sounds a bit like kits, where the kits are like, okay, this is the dual wielder because they got two blades and dual wield there, or like the cloak and dagger, which is you immediately imagine the sneaky character with the blade stabbing people in the back. But Mythic Treasures almost sound like, okay, what if we took the narrative idea of kits, but then added more mechanical stuff onto it, and also a story arc. Because I've been looking at some of these treasures. You sent me a preview, which I very much appreciated, and I got to scroll through and look at some of these. And these story arcs very much looks like they have like multiple beats that it feels like you're supposed to hit them at different levels over the career of a hero, and it feels like they become an essential part of like who the character is or who the hero is, more than just like there's always the backstory like, oh, this was my father's sword, he got it from his father and we've had it for generations. But these Mythic Treasures, it feels also like, yeah, it was my father's sword, but also there's a whole like arc that I have to go through to be able to unlock all the secrets.
Yeah, hopefully you can link the preview in the description, because one of the best ways to see what we're talking about here is just to look at our preview designs, and you can kind of see what we're talking about. But again, I'll just bring up Mjolnir and Thor, right? The fact that Mjolnir can only be carried by the worthy, that is something we wanted in these treasures, that it's not just mechanical, it is also narrative. And we think in a heroic fantasy, part of what defines narratively a hero is a kind of journey that is centered around virtue. The arcs are supposed to represent that as best as we can. And it is kind of a kit design in the sense that what I love about kits in Draw Steel is they are generalized design. They're very abstract design, and that you fill it in with your own imagination. And we wanted to get that in the arcs. We give you suggestions for a kind of journey that a hero can take whenever they pick this treasure. And we want it to be inspirational for something in the player and the director. It inspires ideas in their head, but ultimately it is kind of generalized design in that they have to fill in what the specifics of those arcs and those story beats are.
Yeah, and I'll also say, I think for me as a player, in my experience of playing like RPGs, I think I always found it a bit hard to kind of think up a character arc, like a narrative arc for my character. And it wasn't something that I always like discussed with my directors, right? And I think having this tool and having people already think about it for you makes it easier. I think both for the director and the player. And that's also part of what we want to do here, is to make it easier to have these arcs on your characters. And I just thought, I mean, this is something I thought I wanted to make for Draw Steel anyway, right? I was like, man, I want like a beat system for characters. But then kind of it just clicked for me that, oh, what if I just combine, like I want to make better treasures, or at least treasures that fit better to my tastes, but I also want to do this. And then I just had this eureka moment of like, why not do both at the same time? And I think it makes total sense for a heroic game to have those two ideas kind of coalesce together.
I kept thinking when going through this, because I was introducing some new players to Draw Steel recently, and one of them mentioned that the name and like the story text of abilities help them better imagine and describe what was happening during combat, because it was already kind of giving them an indication of what it looks like. And they that sparked enough to kind of let them imagine it much easier. And I kind of got the same vibe with the story beats, where they look to be just enough that it kind of gets the spark going. You're not necessarily, as you mentioned, Ben, that I'm also a person that doesn't really. I struggle with making an arc, but when I read these, I was like, oh yeah, I see where I'm going for my next beat, which helps me it made me immediately imagine how that could happen.
Yeah, that is very intentional that we kept these things. That is a design decision very early on that we had of we wanted to keep the beats kind of like in the middle of like we don't want to make them too specific, but we don't want to make them too vague. We want to have just enough guidance so that you feel like you have a direction, but you also have your say of how you make them happen and you fill in the gaps.
Yeah, that's part of designing in TTRPGs that I get really excited about, as I feel that I am collaborating with the director that buys the product, and I can make suggestions to him or to them, and it's their job to take those suggestions and really create a story and a world out of them. And it gets me really excited. I mean, just to give an example, one of my favorite treasures that we've designed just personally is actually one of Ben's designs. It's called Monstrous Mutagen. And so this is it's a treasure that kind of fits into this archetype of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but also like the Hulk, where you have a kind of dark passenger inside of you and it comes out in times to save your life, but it is not a pretty thing when it reveals itself, right? Actually, Venom is a good example of this as well. Yeah. There's a lot of, I think, examples in literature. And so this monster emerges whenever you're dying, and it kind of takes over your body. And it's a polymorph treasure. It's like a transformation treasure. But then narratively, what this means is that you have to find a way of coping with that you have this monster inside of you. Like, how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to accept it? Are you going to reject it? Are you going to try to dominate it, or does it dominate you? And our beats try to map out a story arc in those themes that allows you to answer those questions and make your own story out of it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned that specifically, because to some degree it reminds me of the Elemental Inside Complication, which was another kind of reference I felt when I read through the Mythical Treasures, that they feel like a combination, kind of like a combination between a kit and a complication almost. Where but that kind of also leads into the fact that some of these are basically almost like cursed weapons, which is something that isn't really featured in the core rules because of different design decisions. And I kind of applaud NCDM for kind of steering away from some of the more interesting stuff that's come up in TTRPGs over the years. But I feel like third-party supplements, it's a perfect place to have more. I'm not going to call it questionable. That's bad.
Sinister.
Yeah, yes, exactly. More sinister themed items or whatever it might be. Was there something that inspired you to include cursed items? Basically, is what I call them. I'm not sure if you call them that. Do you?
So Monstrous Mutagen is like cursed. It's like a keyword that we use, and it basically just says you need to use the Find a Cure project if you want to get rid of it. And come to think of it, maybe Soul Eater should be that too, but it's currently the only cursed treasure. And the idea for me, well, it's twofold. One, I'm kind of like a closeted edgelord, and I really like I really like edgy stuff. I can't lie. So there's a lot of like more, it's not most of the treasures, but there's a good amount, and I think most of them are probably mine, that are kind of more sinister and edgy. So that's one thing. I just think those types of things are cool. But I also think they are iconic, right? I mean, like the Hulk or Venom or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you can probably find a dozen other examples. Or let's say Soul Eater. It's like a demon blade. It's kind of like a pact blade, and you have this demon who's sort of like a patron in a way, and you have to feed its souls if you want to use its powers and you want to progress. Like some of the beats actually require you to consume souls of things would you kill. That and that's intentionally morally fraught. And it brings to mind the narrative of like, okay, is it okay to do more questionable things, as you say, if it's for the purpose of good, because ultimately you are a hero? And is it okay to consume the souls of like these monsters that you're killing, if it means you can be stronger and help the innocent. And I think those things are to me part and parcel of heroic narratives as well. It's not just let me be a good person and kind of like a goody two shoes. I think part of being heroic in many media and literature is kind of grappling with the darkness within and conquering it and taming it. And I think those are just some of our treasures, but I feel like there's nothing that makes them not heroic. I think it's totally natural fit.
I think it's kind of natural when you're imagining a narrative arc for a hero that there is a kind of vice that they fight against. It creates a kind of antagonist, an internal moral antagonist within your character. And so there is something kind of natural where a lot of our treasures veer into that design space because it's just a really fascinating design space to think about. And I think it's something that we're interested in. I remember in one of our design discussions, we were talking about this idea of is survival selfish when the world depends on you, when you're a hero, right? Like, I mean, this is something... No, I'm fascinated by this idea. This is something I feel like I encounter in real life where, let's just say, I don't want to like dox myself or anything, but I'll just say there's a time in my life when I was a little more independent, and now I'm in a time in my life where there are people that depend on me. And when people depend on you, things that before might have seemed selfish, like getting a job that pays well, they stop seeming selfish, right? Because a job that pays well, it means something for other people, right? Similarly, when you're a hero, if that's a really fascinating temptation to us, is when you're a hero, the grabbing power might not be selfish. Or is it? And that's the sort of question that you get to wrestle with if you buy Mythic Treasures and pick the very cool Soul Eater. Yeah.
I was about to say, isn't that basically every other villain arc? I grab power because I'm the good one.
Yeah. And there are treasures that we've designed that are a little more good coded. And there are treasures that we've designed that are, at least we aimed for, humorous, right? You know, have a little bit of humor in some of them as well. But definitely, I think in this product, just that's where our headspace was at, is we were really interested in the kind of contrast of virtue and vice. Yeah,
I will say though, just for the record, I don't think most of our treasures are explicitly have a sinister power source. Most of them, I would say, are probably either like neutral or good. But even in the good ones, I think you'll find some gray areas. So we have like Saint Scepter, and I should actually let Aestus talk about this one because he designed it.
Yeah, I'm really proud of this one. Saint Scepter is a kind of conduit item where you have a scepter of Saint Elwyn, the Innocent, who is a kind of saint of justice and people who are falsely accused, and bringing justice to the world. And the sort of narrative themes of the treasure play on the idea of maybe the contrast between justice and mercy. And Elwyn's definitely on the justice side of things. And the treasure is about you build up a resource called veneration when you knock enemies prone, causing them to kneel before your saint. And it's definitely like a holy treasure. But it is not, I didn't intend for it to be a naively nice treasure, let's say. You can decide for yourself whether it's good or not, but it's definitely not nice. If it's good, it's maybe a harsh side of good.
That kind of leads into some of the mechanical parts of the treasure, because the narrative beats, I really believe, is a fantastic addition to these complex weapons. But they also have, as you mentioned, a bigger power budget than the treasures you usually find in the core rules. You listed some of the design principles in the document that I got to see when I scrolled all the way to the bottom, tucked away.
You shouldn't have seen that. Maybe we've written some stupid stuff there. I don't know.
I actually just sent him a copy of our internal document. I didn't do an audit to make sure it was all clean, but I trust you, John. I trust you to keep our secrets.
Sure, but we'll figure it out after. But I read through the design principles, which I found really interesting. And one bullet point in the principles that I found interesting, you mentioned that effects are cooler than bonuses. Can you expand on that or elaborate a bit?
I think fundamentally what makes tactical games interesting and fun is making decisions, right? If you're not making decisions, it's not tactical, I think, by definition. So ultimately, when Ace and I try to design a treasure, even if it does damage, like straightforwardly, it just does damage, it has to be kind of like in a roundabout way, or it just doesn't do damage at all, maybe it does effects, because we want these treasures to enrich the tactical space, to thicken the decision tree that you're faced with as a player. And we think that effects are more interesting than on like if we go to the total other end of the spectrum, like +1 to damage, right? We have that as well because it's like kind of part and parcel of level treasures. But that type of thing of like on a tier 3, you do extra damage. To us, it's not creating any decisions, right? It's not like at most it's like you're gonna try maybe a little bit harder to get a double edge, right? But it's not really enriching your decision space. It's not really making you consider alternative paths or lines of what you're gonna do. So to us, effects, which are often, they have more words than do damage. They change the decision space of your enemies, or they open up decision space for you or your allies. Those are things ultimately that are more interesting, and I think that's part of why in Draw Steel in the actual game you almost have no abilities that just do damage, which I think I really love about Draw Steel. Like even like simple abilities are almost always like damage plus some kind of condition. And I think a lot of people's favorite abilities would probably be things that are even more wacky, that probably have more text than usual, but they also do interesting things. So that was definitely a guiding principle, which is a part of, you could say, our guiding principle of these treasures have to be tactical. We're trying as much as possible not to have like that sort of design space of when you attack, you do extra damage, or when you attack, on a tier 3, you do a condition. Like those things, they can be powerful, but I don't find them to be tactically interesting. That was something we tried really to steer into of like tactics and deepening them.
Yeah, the way I think of it is actually Colvillian language. I think of he uses this term action-oriented design. And I like to contrast that with just, flat statistical design. We're definitely aiming for action-oriented design. And I will say, I thought I had a pretty high standard, but working with Ben really has a gift for understanding tactical choices in design. And he pushes me over and over to reiterate items that I'm drafting, to really examine them from the perspective of a player making tactical choices. And yeah, I am expecting that to be a strength of our product.
You do mention in the text that you make a distinction between combat trinkets and utility trinkets, which is something the core rules does not do. And you mentioned that specifically too, that you're introducing a distinction here. Can you explain a bit what the intention behind that is?
In the books, and I'll preface this by saying I'm like obsessed with like balance. So maybe this is like just a me thing, but the book doesn't delineate between trinkets that are mostly for utility and mostly for combat. And that can create, in theory, a situation when one character has a bunch of utility trinkets and another character has a bunch of combat trinkets, and the latter character would have more combat power. And it feels like in play to me that utility trinkets are the party's treasure, whereas a combat trinket is your treasure. Because utility trinkets, anyone can use them, anyone can give ideas on how to use them. There's usually, maybe you're the one using them, but everyone is pitching in, and they're helping like the whole party in a kind of get through an obstacle. And with a combat trinket, it feels more personal. It's more yours. At least that's how I feel, and I think Aestus does too. So yeah. So that was something we wanted to delineate because we think utility trinkets should not be under the same recommendations and limitations of trinkets. Like the book basically recommends each character gets one trinket per echelon. We think that rule or guideline should be each character gets one combat trinket per echelon. Because utility trinkets you can give out as much as you can, like candy, and it's probably you're not going to break anything really. Like out of combat stuff, there's not like this strict mathematical balance, right? I mean, these utility trinkets aren't even mathematical in their essence. Whereas for combat trinkets, they are, and you don't want to overdo them. So we wanted to create that distinction, and we also wanted to create that distinction because we mostly want to do combat trinkets for this product. We're doing some utility trinkets. We're trying to like cover some like fantasies that are expected, I think, in like D&D adjacent games. Like we have this one trinket that lets you like kind of grow trees out of the ground, which I love. And we're also, by the way, you just had Jenny Redacted on your podcast, and she's actually designing a bunch of trinkets for us.
Yeah, she's a great designer. Product.
Yeah, I really love her works. So she was like working on her own like kind of trinkets thing, and I was like, "Can I just buy these from you?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." So we're just we're commissioning her for a bunch of trinkets too. So yeah, anyway, we also want to do a bunch of combat trinkets, partly because these mythic treasures, they're kind of, you can't have more than one, right? And I think something that a lot of people like about level treasures is you can mix and match them. You kind of like that feeling of being geared all the way. Of like I'm like equipped to the gills with like a bunch of like I have our magic armor and I have a magic weapon. And here with mythic treasures, you might only have one of those. You might only have one mythic weapon, but you don't have a cool armor because the combat trinkets in the base game, they're not armors, they're not weapons, and they're not implements. They're other stuff. And we thought this would be a good opportunity to introduce trinkets that are armors and weapons and implements to kind of fill in the gap that's being left by you only being able to have one mythic treasure or one level treasure. And also we just think they're cool. They're a cool idea to have trinkets that aren't just things that I guess aren't weapons.
I think the mix and match fun of combining this treasure with that is so core to any kind of reward system that we knew we had to support that type of fun, even though your mythic treasure takes up all of your like level treasure power budget. You only get one of them. And like I said, the reason why you can only get one mythic treasure is because that is what's necessary to capture this concept of a truly character defining treasure. But, just like Bilbo in The Hobbit, the ring of invisibility really defines what he can do, right? Like, it's the main thing that makes him a burglar is that he has this ring. But he also has Sting. And in our version, our vision for treasures in Draw Steel, Sting would be a combat trinket, and that ring would be his mythic treasure. And when we did an audit of the trinkets in Draw Steel's Heroes book, we just realized that they weren't sufficient to get that, either the narrative aspect that you want, because sometimes you want a sword or armor, and they weren't sufficient to synergize with our mythic treasures to create that mix and match fun. So we kind of knew we had to design our own trinkets. But if I can say a little bit about utility trinkets as well, and about how they belong to the party, this is just an experience that I've had running a lot of tabletop RPGs. like the bag of holding that you get isn't just used by one player, right? The portable hole isn't. The hither thither staff from Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie, everyone uses that. Maybe one of the players operates it, but everyone uses it in their plans on how to do the heist. And there also, I find with utility treasures, you can give it a humorous element, which is really important to a game. I stole this from like a YouTube short. I wish I could remember the creator so I could credit them, but it was Bagpipes of Invisibility, where when you're playing the bagpipes, you're invisible. Everyone can hear you, but you're invisible. I gave that to my players. They loved it. It was hilarious. It would create hilarious moments, but you don't want that taking up someone's power budget to make their character tactically fun, right? So we had to separate them.
I will also say we're gonna have at least 100 trinkets in this treasure. It's called Mythic Treasures, but it's also going to have a shit ton of trinkets, just because we think they're fun and they're kind of way more easy to produce than Mythic Treasures. Designing Mythic Treasures is very hard. It takes a lot of effort just to get a first draft out, and then me and Aestus argue about it and how to improve it, and then we play test it, and then we argue some more, and it's because we're trying to craft this very bespoke tactical experience, and our standards are very, very high. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of revisions and debating. And I feel like me and Aestus, we have similar design principles, but we also differ in some places, and that actually very much improves the product. Because I really believe that like debate and enriches right. By debating something and arguing about it, we expose each other's kind of like weak points, and we help refine what our thoughts are. Even if we don't disagree, ultimately by arguing, we're refining what we think about a topic. And I think the disagreements between me and Aestus are really helping make both the treasures better and us better designers.
That actually touches upon one thing that I found in the design notes, because in the trinkets design philosophy, one of the points is ask, why is this a coat? And it explains, and I want you to elaborate on that, but there's a comment here that says, no, this is something Aestus cares about mostly. So so if you have questions, ask him.
Yeah, that was notes for our very talented partner Jenny on just sort of general designs that we had for the trinkets. Yeah, this is a hang up that's maybe just me, and I was learning this. How do I explain that idea? How do I explain why is it a coat?
Give the example. Just give the direct example of how that came about.
I think she pitched a really cool trinket. It was a utility trinket. I believe it was called Coat of the Treasure Hunter. So it's a coat where you wear it and it helps you identify where treasures are. And it kind of pinpoints them on like an X on a map kind of thing, and then you go seek them out or something like that. I hope I'm doing it justice. It's been a while since I wrote that comment. But to me, the effect did not match that it was a coat. To me, that had to be glasses or something like that, right? If you are making a magic set of bracers, then it has to do something that reflects the fact that it's bracers. And so how do I communicate that to our designer in as few words as possible? I just wrote, why is it a coat? But yes, Ben and I disagreed on that direction. And in the end, he graciously allowed me to include my little hang up there because it was something that was important to me, but is maybe not important to everybody.
I find it an interesting comment, and I want to hear your thoughts behind it. Where it's last point in the design principle, which is steal stuff from D&D.
Yeah, that was mostly about trinkets. Because I think there are a lot of very iconic magic items in D&D, and I have no qualms about stealing them. I think, there are certain things that are just iconic, and I think people will love to see. Yeah, that's it. I just think if there are cool designs out there, why not steal them?
Yeah, and I will say Ben's in really good company here, because I had a really insightful interview with James Introcaso in the early days of Draw Steel, where we were talking about reward design and loot design. And one thing that he mentioned to me in that was that if you're making a game in this tradition, you have to have a bag of holding. And you don't have to call it a bag of holding, but you have to have it. And there's some things that are just iconic. And I think vanilla Draw Steel covers a lot of those really well.
Yeah.
But we also wanted to do our best to give our take on those classics. Yeah.
Yeah. Things that just weren't covered by the core book, which we think are still iconic and worth including. And, it's worth mentioning. I mean, the base book of Draw Steel doesn't have that many trinkets. So I think we have a lot of design space to play around with, both for utility trinkets and combat trinkets.
With the power that comes with these treasures, I was about to say, there also comes great responsibility.
Great responsibility, yeah. Just true. That should be in our design principles.
Yeah.
With the power that comes with these treasures, my not necessarily immediate thought, but my immediate thought as a director is, how is this going to affect balance? How is this going to affect?
That's a great question.
The combat math that in Draw Steel actually kind of works. So how have you, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Ben has thought about this a lot. Go for it, Ben.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot. And as we said, one of the things that we had to do was we had to give these a bigger power budget than the core treasures, because we otherwise could not make these ideas come true, to really instantiate a certain fantasy and to have enough mechanics to deepen the tactical experience. We just need more power budget to play around with. And I thought about how these will be balanced against level treasures, and I ultimately came to the conclusion of I want them to have roughly the same power as 2-level treasures. So that's like the benchmark for me. And I think for the most part we're succeeding, and we're play testing things to match that benchmark. I think early on they're probably, like, until level 5, they're probably a bit stronger than 2-level treasures, but not in a way that skews and counterbalance, from our testing at least. And at 5th level it just balances out. And and actually at 9th they're probably weaker than 2-level treasures. And this actually touches upon how me and Aces also perceive how treasures should act. We want them to be a big boost when you get them, to be really impactful, and we want to put all the coolest stuff early on. And we really, really wanted them, the full fantasy and the full tactical loop, so to speak, to be present from the get-go. We don't, like, for a lot of treasures in vanilla, it kind of feels like they don't do much at level 1. It's kind of ignorable, I would say. It's like a nice little bonus. It sometimes comes up, but it's very minor, which makes sense because they have the power budget of 1 treasure, right? But because we have the power budget of 2, we could do way bigger things. And we really wanted to make sure at level 1, you already have this kind of complete fantasy and a complete tactical loop. That was something that was very important to us. I think that was something that we kind of debated early on. And we had, like, on first drafts, some of our first drafts had a big part of, like, the tactical loop come in at level 5. And I argued hard, and I argued very much in favor of, like, pushing those features to level 1 and just balancing it so it fits. So yeah, ultimately we also include, like, recommendations in the book of, like, if you're having a party that's mixed and some of them have mythic treasures, some of them have level treasures, you're gonna want to make sure that by level 3 the character with level treasures already has 2, because level 3 is also like a bit of a power bump for the mythic treasure as well. And we're also making sure, like, the math is bound, so even though you're having all these extra effects, ultimately, like, mathematically you're not necessarily doing a whole lot more damage, even though you're doing all these cool stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think from our testing at least, and that this is what we're aiming for, it doesn't skew the balance in a very noticeable way. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and I will say it doesn't surprise me that you asked this, John, because when you look at our treasures, and hopefully our viewers are looking at the preview that we can provide. I hope it's linked in the description. One of the first things you'll notice is that there's 2 whole extra levels in here that you're getting stuff, right? At 3rd and 7th, you're just getting more stuff than than if you did level treasures in
usually heroics at those levels.
Yeah, but that's the deceptive part of the balancing, is that those extra levels that we're giving you are typically heroic abilities. And the thing about heroic abilities is they aren't an additive, like they don't add to your power. What they add is options, right? So you can choose to spend your 5 HR on this ability, or you can choose to spend it on another. And if we balance our abilities so that they aren't more powerful than a similar costing ability that's from your class, then you get a small power boost, but just because you have more flexibility in which ability that you choose.
Yeah.
But when you're just looking at it on the page, it seems like it's so much more powerful that I can do this now. But you can either do it or one of your class abilities, and we are really, really obsessed, I will say, of not overshadowing what your class can do, because we still believe that is so important to the identity of your characters, your class. And then, the other kind of deceptive balancing thing is that if you are using the treasure system in the Heroes book, you can have, I mean, it's recommended that you have 2 level treasures, but you can have up to 3. Right? I think it's after you get over 3, then there's that kind of
They wrestle for
the thing
control.
that'll happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're running 3 level treasures out of the Heroes book, you're probably going to be more powerful than someone that just gets 1 of our mythic treasures. And yeah, ultimately, that's our job. We have to make sure that you can run these, you can follow the encounter rules that Willie made in the Monsters book that are awesome, and still mostly craft balanced encounters with our treasures. So far in our playtest, that's been working out. I mean, we did just do a big overhaul where we had to push a lot of the early game power balance in our treasures towards the mid game a little bit more.
Yeah, I would
because of
say
playtest feedback.
mostly like the numerical stuff. That's like the
Yeah.
important thing. Like we had, let's say, a monstrous mutagen and it made you do more damage, but at level 1, that can be a lot of damage. Like you have a +2 to melee damage, right? Pushing that to level 3 felt like necessary because monster stamina is so low at those levels that +2 makes a lot of difference. But when you push to level 3, all of a sudden it's not that big a deal. So it was mostly about pushing power, numerical power, from level 1 to 3. And that's like a big thing you have to be attentive to, is you need to not give too much numerical strength. And often, if you give effects, as we said, that's both more interesting, but can also be more balanced than just giving extra damage. Because even if you get all these extra effects, ultimately the game is about reducing the monster's stamina before they reduce yours and doing it as quickly as possible. And that is the ultimate win condition for most combats. You just want to kill the monsters. And as long as we don't supercharge like your crowd control abilities and let you totally disable monsters, and we don't give you too much strong numerical power, it's actually quite hard to break the balance of the game, just because of how the scaling in it is built, which is to say, it's very well built.
So my recommendation to readers is, when you look at our preview, you're going to get the impression that these are probably more powerful than they are. You should try it once and before you write off, and that's why we made a preview. Give it a shot, and I think you'll see that we put a lot of thought into the balance.
We are closing in on the hour already. And I always ask my guests to bring some kind of recommendation that they want the listeners to either be aware of or check out. So I hope you've brought some good recommendations. We'll start with Aestus. What have you brought?
This was hard for me because I feel like I only like things that other people find boring. Anyways, I settled on a movie that your viewers have probably watched before, but I just want to draw their attention to it again, and it's the 1980s Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. I just love this movie, and I've been thinking about it a lot, because it asks this question about the riddle of steel, which, as far as I can figure, is about what makes steel trustworthy, right? What gives steel its strength. And there's a kind of progression in this movie about the steel, the strength of steel is in the steel itself, but then the sword breaks, and he progresses into the strength of steel being the muscle that wields it and the skill of the person who wields the sword. And that's ultimately proven wrong. And then this movie ends with him thinking, and I think the answer that Conan comes to is the strength of the steel is in the will, right? It's in the will to persevere. That's what made him powerful. And yeah, I've been thinking about that in terms of design, is how often in this project and others, where does talent come from? And it doesn't come from what you think. It comes in the will to write something bad and constantly iterate. And if you just persevere, you can polish something into a good product. I've just been thinking about it. And I always like to encourage designers. So that's hopefully a little bit of encouragement for you guys.
Wow, that
Man, I cannot beat that. I'm gonna sound so fucking stupid.
You can move mine to the end. Just edit it and move mine to the
end. Yeah, I mean, mine is pretty banal. And it's also kind of cheating, because I'm gonna recommend something that I created. I'm gonna recommend people to check out the brewery. It's this server. It has like 700 something people. And it's awesome. Turned out so much better than I expected. I could not expect it to flourish the way it did. We have so many amazing designers. We have so many people providing feedback to each other and refining their designs together, and so many play tests firing off every week, with people playtesting each other's stuff, giving very detailed feedback. And it's such like a fertile ground, I feel, for draw steel design. And I'm just floored by it every time. Like I stop to think about it, how incredible it grew. And yeah, I think anyone who's interested in designing for draw steel should really check it out. And I'm not taking credit for it. To be clear, I think it's kind of like it just happened. You know, we just have so many amazing designers, and it just happened that the community became as amazing as it is. And yeah, I just think it's grew past what I imagined or what I even maybe intended, and it's just become like kind of its own thing. And yeah, I'm really happy that it exists, and I encourage people to check it out.
The brewery has been really impressive. As someone who joined it fairly recently, or at least I think so. It's really impressive how much activity there is, both in general, but also the amount of playtests. Really impressive, and it shows how much people care about making the stuff that they make good.
Yes. Yes, for sure. I remember like at the beginning it was like just only me. I was coordinating a playtest every Saturday, and then like bit by bit, people that weren't me were starting to coordinate playtests, to the point where now, you know, my playtests are drop in the ocean, right? There's so many playtests going on, and it's great to see.
So, John, we might be out of time for this, but there was a question I wanted to ask you. Is that all right?
Oh, okay, yeah. Go ahead.
When you looked over our drafts so far, did you have a favorite? Did one stand out?
Ooh. I mean, this is a bit of a basic bitch answer.
Okay.
But I'm a sucker for Mjolnir.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. Ben crushed it with that one. There were early drafts of that where I felt like we're missing something. But I didn't say anything, and I let Ben work on it, and he crushed it with that. Yeah. You should explain it, Ben.
Yeah, well, at the beginning, I was like, okay, Mjolnir, Thor flies with it, and he slams people around. Okay, I'll slap some flying on it, and kind of like a take on like the thundering imbuement. which lets you push people when you hit them.
Mm.
It was all right, but it's kind of emblematic of, we said maybe we can get a bit spicy or candid. It's kind of emblematic of what I don't really love about some of the treasures in the base book, is that they just they give you some effects which are good, but they're not necessarily interesting to play around with. And so that was my first draft of it, which in hindsight I don't really like. And then I applied our principles to it, which are the treasures have to invoke tactical decisions, and they have to be interactive. And I ultimately went with a mechanic that I really like, of when you hit someone with this hammer, they become primed with electrical energy. And then when you next hit them, or not necessarily you, someone hits them, they discharge with a burst of damage, or a burst one around them. You can set up chain reactions this way, right? So you could prime a bunch of people, and then cause them to discharge, and they go in this chain reaction of all of them detonating. And yeah, I feel like that is an example of how we wanted to make these designs interactive, right? Because that now you're kind of thinking, how do I set this up? How do I manipulate? Do I use forced movement? Maybe my allies have forced movement. How do we bunch these monsters together? How do I hit the most people with this treasure so I prime the most people? And how do I set them up for chain reactions? And then after a playtest, a playtester told me, this is J-Cons, the designer of the night, I want some way to move people kind of off turn, when they explode, because sometimes it's not that easy to set up these chain reactions. So I added this free triggered action that costs 1 HR. When someone explodes, you can kind of slide them a bit, so you can get them closer to other creatures before they detonate. And that also kind of unlocked a very important piece of the design there. So yeah, I mean, that is kind of emblematic of what we're doing, I think. We're trying to create really interesting choices and tactical considerations, and how those things can hook into the existing character options in Draw Steel, which is something we haven't talked about, but we really want these treasures to be something you can build around. So, you have this treasure, and now it makes you ask questions of, okay, how do I build some forced movement into this build, for instance? Maybe whatever lets me group people together, maybe pull them together. Maybe my teammates, maybe now they want to pick up more force movement abilities, and so on and so forth. And this is kind of something we were very attentive to with all of our treasures, is how do we create these sort of hooks for your actual class build to interact with, and to hook into these mechanical effects. And how do you kind of use that synergy to synthesize something that is greater than the sum of its parts by combining these elements.
I gotta say, when I sent you the draft document, I thought I should highlight one of these that I think John in particular would like. And as I looked over the list, I thought, I don't know you that well as a player, but from the playtest we had, I thought, I don't know if we've designed a really good John Venor item, which to my mind, when I play with you, you like to play Time Raider talents, you like that timescape setting. And so correct me if I'm wrong about any of these assumptions, but I also felt like you like to play, in the Goblin playtest that we did, you like to play kind of larger than life characters, and you like to do the voices. And
yes.
And then you're also a Doctor Who guy, from your background. Is this audio only?
Yeah,
People can't see your background. Yeah. Well, he's in the TARDIS, guys. Right now, he is filming from the TARDIS. Yeah. And so you like that kind of timey-wimey mystery. And I was thinking about it last night. I have one item left, and I was trying to brainstorm, could I do a John Venor item that fits this? And this doesn't need to be in the video, but I had this pitch. I literally thought of this last night. I tried something similar to this with a friend of mine, but it didn't take for him. But so here's the idea. I call the treasure Enigma for now. And you can kind of imagine a scene with it where, okay, so you're playing your Time Raider talent. It's an early hero adventure, and your first kind of nemesis is like a cult of goblins because you're goblin points, and they follow this insane goblin prophet who they call the Jack of Clubs, and it culminates around the time that you hit level 2. You beat them, and so the Jack of Clubs is down, but he's not dead, and he's just kind of he's like laughing, and he's babbling about how he's seen it, like he can't die, he lives forever, he'll never die, you can't kill him. And then your character, like an instinct, like the same way a cat learns how to pounce, you lock eyes with him, and his shrieks of laughter become shrieks of pain, and like you slurp up his psyche into your own mind, and now you have the Jack of Clubs in your own character's head. Okay? And this is something that keeps happening to you. You keep absorbing people's egos into your own head, and then you can act them. You can act them if you want, right? Like it's just something for a character actor like you to dig into. You can do the voices. But mechanically, I thought like, oh, this should be about stealing monsters' abilities. Like maybe you could even use malice to fuel some abilities. I'm just brainstorming at this point. But how did I do, John? Did I capture what you like to see as a character, or am I way off?
That actually sounds really fun.
Nice.
The most insane part is when I played with Willie for the complications thing. The complication I ended up with, I don't remember the name now, but the concept was that I was a product of the Ajax's body banks.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pick the complication, you get to freely pick ancestry traits from all ancestries, because you're a patchwork of different ancestries. That's kind of like the fantasy. So you just get to freely pick between them to create one new amalgam of ancestries. And
awesome.
Part of when we played, an idea struck me that at different times, the different ancestries impact like the personality and the way the character speaks with different levels of control. So my idea was that almost every time that I spoke, I changed my voice because it was a different part of like the collective speaking.
Right? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. No, that's an idea I really like. I like this thought that a director or like a GM, they put so much time into their NPCs, right? Or the villains that you face. And, you know, they're going to give them a voice, and they're going to give them manners of speaking, and they're going to give them a personality. Well, what if you could hand that off to one of your players, and then they get to be that guy after they defeat him? And yeah, and I thought it could be centered around like a narrative of mystery. That's why I called it Enigma. You're trying to figure out like, why is this happening to me? And I have some theories about why it's happening, but I don't know. Ben might veto this later, but I'm kind of psyched about this. And
I already have so many objections.
Yes, this is how we work. This is how we work. Yeah. But so it probably won't make it into the book. But yeah, it would be cool if it could. Yeah.
I do have one more thing I wanted to say, which we haven't touched upon, is the Mythic Treasures, somewhat uniquely, they don't have a specific subtype, like a weapon, that it can only be used by that specific kit, which I think some people probably won't like. So we are including like this sort of table of like, if you want to limit these treasures to a specific form, these are like their sort of canon forms, quote unquote. So you can use that, but at base, they only have keywords, which are either armor, weapon, or implement. And so that way, you know, maybe they have a form in the book, but that's not necessarily the form that treasure takes in your adventure, right? So maybe Stormcaller, the Mjolnir-like treasure, like in the book, is going to be illustrated as a hammer, and in the table, it's going to be like this light weapon, probably. But that doesn't mean you have to use it that way in your adventure, which is why we explicitly didn't give it the light weapon tag. We just gave it a weapon tag. And furthermore, we also, for a lot of our treasures, we have weapon or implement. just because we want them to be both. If you, I mean, they can be either or, right? Not both, because we think a lot of these treasures work as both. Some of them don't, and some of them are either only implement or only weapon. But a lot of them are both. So like Soul Eater, this soul-eating sword, there's nothing really about it that would make it not work as an implement as well. It would work just as well. So we want to have that freedom to give players and directors that freedom of like kind of explicitly allowing them to reflavor and reskin these treasures however way you want. And our way to do that is not have the keywords even be there, even though there is like this sort of implicit canon form.
Yeah. More of that generalized design like you get in kits. You want to give them something that they can latch onto for their imagination, but you also want them to have the freedom to imagine anything that they can.
Yeah, and for the narratives as well, by the way, we're explicitly saying, if you want to change any of these beats, change them. If you want to ignore the beats, you can ignore them as well. We think it's less cool, but you can do that if you only like the technical crunch aspect of it. And you can change anything about the narrative. We think some of the treasures are very ripe for reflavoring, like the Monstrous Mutagen we talked about earlier. It's currently like, it's more flavored as like this alchemical transformation, but I can imagine so many ways to reflavor it, right? Like you could make it like Venom, like the Green Hulk, like the Hulk. We really think that these treasures can be a lot of things. Like even Stormcaller, I could imagine it being like this sort of techie treasure. Maybe it's like, it's not lightning and thunder, it's like actual electricity, and you have this sort of high-tech weapon. So yeah, that's also something. Like that. Yeah, so we really want to give players and directors like explicit freedom to like do whatever they want with these treasures.
All right, it's we're way over time.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault.
I'm trying to beat Jenny for the longest podcast on Green.
Jonas also talked about beating Jenny.
No, I mean, I don't know if we're there yet, but I can keep yapping forever. I mean,
that's my fear.
No, don't let us keep you from your family. This has been a blast, John. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, but also just to hang out with you. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Likewise, it's been a real pleasure having you both on. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sure.
Yep, same for me. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much to both Aestus and SurfingBird for coming on. I really like the idea of thinking of these treasures as a cross between kits for their narrative flavor, complications for their character-defining features, and level treasures. If you want to be featured on Goblin Points or know of someone else who should be, leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, or send me an email on tips@goblinpoints.com. Links to everything, including this script, can be found in the show notes and on goblinpoints.com. You can support my work by becoming a patron member. Paying members get to submit questions to my upcoming guests here on Goblin Points. You also get access to premium features on Stall. Stall is a digital toolset for playing and running Draw Steel. Digital hero sheets, encounter builder, monster lookup, the complete rules text, and more. Such as the Stall Supplement Index, a comprehensive list of supplements being published for Draw Steel in one convenient place. Visit stall.app, STAWL.app. Next episode is going to be on the 25th. That's going to be the interview with Peter Lacara, who's writing The Withering War, an adventure where the heroes do like Aragorn and haul their asses all over the place to recruit allies against the impending horde. See you next time. Snackis.